Good evening, Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next installment of the Observation Post weekly Facebook Live broadcast. Gonna try to keep it short. I always say that, but we'll see how it goes. I think I'm gonna only do a couple items on my list, and then there's something that's bugging me about that Israeli conflict that I'll talk about. Don't know how long, we'll see. And then I'll go through one or two items that I have written down or cross my mind. Okay, first of all, the nice structured part, or, as much as I don't have a script, I at least have a numbered list that I'm working down through. Number 345 from that list, Hansard 1964. Member of Parliament bragging about how no government money was being used in the Canada pension plan. But all working people contributing to the Canada pension plan are the government in reality. I suspect they meant no tax subsidies, but the worker is the one who pays taxes, and they call CPP payments a contribution, which is legally correct. A contribution can only be used legally for what it was collected for, while taxes can be used however the government sees fit. Now, I've been waxing on and on about this because of my reviewing the Auditor General report from 1986 and 1991 that I was reading over recently. But to most people and employers, all of the contributions and deductions for premiums and stuff that are taken out of a check, they just look at it as taxes. Now, that doesn't change the fact that legally they aren't taxes. And the government shouldn't have borrowed the money that was in the federal pension under the Superannuation Act retirement pensions, because it's not their money. Now, they thought, or they still think it's their money, but it's not their money. It belongs to the person who earned it. If you're banking money for somebody else, like in the government's case, people in the RCMP, or the public service, or the Canadian Forces, they earn their money with their service. Now, if you deduct some money for whatever reason, it's not your money, or their money. It's your money. So, they seem to think, probably because they control the money, that it's theirs. Now, the next one, number 346. Now, it's funny because I was thinking that I would have moved this item up, but it was there naturally, which is a coincidence, which is good. Can the government have income or means tested programs without informing the citizen? I say no, as the government, people have the right to know. For example, the income replacement benefit / earnings loss benefit is income tested by admission. Now, I don't have to prove something once someone admits it. I kind of do, because that's just my nature. But, I found a document, and in the glossary that was describing different acronyms and programs and things, and it said earnings loss benefit, an income tested taxable benefit. Now, it's not supposed to be taxable, because it's supposed to be a substitute for a tort lawsuit. Now, a tort lawsuit pays you damages, and damages are capital, so you cannot tax the receipt of a sum of capital money as income, because it's not income, it's fucking capital. It's that simple. Canada taxes 5 different sources of income. You have income from employment, income from an office of employment, income from business, income from capital, and income from something else. There's 5. I usually name them all. However, you can have capital gains taxes. Now, that's when you have, say, buy shares in a company in the stock market. You pay $1 to buy the share, you sell it for $2. You use your property, your capital, to buy the first share. You sold the share, which was your property, and you had a capital gain of $2 minus $1, so you have a capital gain of $1. Now, if you become injured and you're a civilian and you sue the driver if it was in an automobile accident, or if you're in the military and you get some kind of compensation for your injury, or if you're a worker and you get injured on a job, you get workers' compensation. You're receiving a sum of capital, not income. So you can't tax capital as income because that's not how you do it. You have to apply the capital taxation rules to the receipt of a sum of capital. If you receive income, they apply the income tax rules. So if anything, it's about, my argument is based on the proper legal characterization of something. And that's something that my obsessive compulsive personality disorder that I always talk about, people might not understand it, but I want the world to be black and white, okay? Right and wrong. If you have capital gains taxes in the Income Tax Act, someone gets a sum of capital, you want to tax it, you apply the capital gains taxation rules. However, when you get damages paid to you to balance the scales, you were injured by somebody else, so therefore the payment you get is a debt paid back to you by the person who injured you, and you're not going to get a capital gain because the compensation principle in the common law says you cannot receive more money than you lost. See how simple it is? Now, that applies to insurance as well. Now, insurance is often the one who pays in a tort lawsuit. If someone was walking up to my door and it was icy and I didn't put salt on the steps or sand or go out and knock it off, that person slips and falls. They have a tort lawsuit against me for negligence because I owed them a duty of care to not injure them. And because of my negligence, they can sue me and win. And they had to prove the amount of damages. And then after they proved the amount of damages, my insurance would pay them. I think homeowners insurance would pay it. In that case, if you're on the road in a car, your automobile insurance would pay it. Now, it seems to a lot of people that if you receive a sum of money, that you automatically are getting income. But that's not true. It all depends on why you're getting it. If you get a sum of money because you gave your services to an employer, you received income, and according to our Income Tax Act, which only started in 1917, by the way, it hasn't been here since Canada was a nation, then you will get taxed as income, on that as income. Because tax is a person's responsibility, their duty to pay taxes to support the government, because the government has programs and services. Now, I had enough of that. 2 issues I figured I'd talk about briefly so I can say I'm sticking to my going down through my list. I'll do the Israel thing first. Again, I was telling you explicitly about my obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Yesterday or the day before, an explosion happened at a hospital in Gaza. Now, Israel's been bombing the hell out of there because Hamas went into a terrorist group, went into Israel and killed, now the updated list is 1,400 people in Israel. So they came in by paragliders, they came in boats, and they came in across the wire, tore the wire down, tunnels and stuff. And they launched a surprise attack and they killed a lot of people, brutally murdered people. And these are not people in uniform. They killed civilians, which, as a former soldier, I find disgusting. Okay? If you're in a war and you have two sides, one enemy, A, B, whatever, red and blue, you have the laws of war, and you can fight with because your nation sanctioned it under the laws of war, the laws of armed conflict. because there are rules to wars. Now these people went in and butchered Israeli people, and they went in on this one rave or a concert or something, and they killed 250 there. So a hospital blew up. Now, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and they said that Israel blew up the hospital. Now, I ask you, what could they gain from blowing up a hospital? That's just common sense. Nothing, not one thing could they gain from it. And then, but, you know, the other side, as Israel presented the evidence, and it seemed very credible. And there's a saying in law, and I've studied a lot of law, read a lot of law in my research for veterans. He who alleges must prove. Now, it was reported in the media because Hamas, the people who attacked Israel, the terrorists. Now, who will believe the word of terrorist, first of all? So the terrorists who attacked Israel put out a press release that Israel killed 500 or 600 innocent people at a hospital in Gaza. Now, so this is also very similar to what used to happen in Afghanistan when Canada was there, and it happened to the Americans in Iraq. If something happened, the first one to get the news out got all the story, and everybody else, if it came out a few hours later, they didn't believe that story because the people who got the news out first were the ones who got believed. That's just the way a lot of people are. They think that anything else comes out, they're wrong. Now, another note on that. If you have the truth and you have a lie, and it could be on either side, if you bring in enough bullshit to make somebody say, well, I don't know who to believe, then the one who is lying is the one who wins. Because they have introduced propaganda, lies, and bullshit, and had enough people not believe the truth, that instead of everybody believing the facts, because there is only one person that's right here, somebody killed them people. Now, how many people? And was it a mistake or on purpose? That's a whole nother story. But the thing is, they both can't be right. Okay? So Israel said it was Hamas. Actually, this was the Islamic Jihad, a different group that is also operating in Gaza. And the other people say it's Israel. Now, I was watching a lot of YouTube around the time that this happened, and I was thinking, that don't look like an airstrike. These people, and that was just my own opinion without watching YouTube experts. I mean, I said, there's an awful lot of flame and stuff there. When they were showing to Israel, it strikes on all the stuff. The buildings would blow up. The Israelis would put a bomb at the base of a building, and then they might put another bomb on the other side of the base of the building. The whole building would collapse in on itself like a controlled demolition you would see on TV. Now, whether there were people in there and whether there were innocents or militants is another story, but it seems like the Israelis are trying to limit collateral damage. So anyway, a few hours after the claims came out from the terrorists that Israel blew up a hospital and they inflated it up to 800 people there. Now, a rule of war is usually for every dead you get 2 or 3 injured, wounded. So they should have had 800 dead and 2,400 wounded according to these fuckers, which I don't believe because they're terrorists, first of all. But then Israel come out and they said, well, we have videos. And they showed 2 or 3 different angles of live streams. One of them was from Al Jazeera, which right now is one news agency that has me pissed the fuck off. Because I was watching it this evening and they just brought in their experts and they were showing how Israel is the one at fault, even though all the evidence is still pointing at them, and they were doing what a recent news story about the U.S. Speakership bullshit, because down there they're having this problem trying to get a speaker for the House of Representatives, and the Republicans are trying to blame the Democrats. Now, the Republicans got 217 people voted in, and the Democrats got 200, and therefore the Republicans should be able to do whatever it wants because it is the majority of people and majority votes. So a group of extremists, almost terrorists again, these Republican fuckers, decided to get rid of the speaker, McCarty, and it's like a train wreck. I don't want to be watching it, but I watch it because it's so fucking unreal. You can't believe this shit is happening. So a CNN news anchor was asking this congressman, a Republican congressman, about it, and then he said, well, the Democrats put us into this mess. And she pushed back. She said, well, how can you say that it was the Democrats there when you control the House? Well, 96% of the votes that came that got rid of the speaker was Democrats, so it was their fault. Well, after he kept bullshitting like that, she said, well, that's pretty incredible mental gymnastics that you have there, Congressman. Well, that's what I was saying about the Al Jazeera bullshit. If they had had any credible evidence to show that this was Israel that really did it. Okay, here's some of the examples that I've seen. They showed the pictures of where the projectile hit. It looked to be about a foot wide, 6 or 8 inches deep. If you drop a bomb from a fast mover, jet, you're going to put a pretty big hole in that pavement. That they only have paving stones. So when the Israelis showed their videos of the sky, they showed this light going up from the ground, which was a rocket. And I've been interested, unfortunately, because when I get obsessed about things, I start reviewing it. So I've been watching YouTube videos about how they create these rockets. Now, they don't have a factory. It's not like they're getting manufactured to specific standards. So they dig up water pipes. Then they cut the water pipes up. Then they take sugar and potassium nitrate, I believe, and they create a rocket motor. They melt it together and they pour it into the steel casing. They add a few fins. They put nails and ball bearings and stuff in there, and they put an explosive warhead on it, and then they let her rip. Now, it wouldn't come to me as no great surprise if a lot of those rockets failed. And Israel, in their video, said 450 of the rockets that have been shot at Israel have failed in this most recent week or two. So that's a pretty high percentage of failures. So anyway, the light was going up into the sky, and then there was a flash, and then there was another flash, and then on the ground below there was 2 flashes, and then a huge fire at the hospital. Now, it's not a big coincidence that a rocket came up from the ground directly behind the hospital, about a mile or 2 or 10 or whatever away, got up into the air, and then blew up prematurely, and then the pieces fell down, and because you have a rocket, now they might be designed to go a certain distance, and because it only went a short distance, the rocket fuel hit the ground. So they showed the aftermath, like you call an after-action report, of the explosion, so-called explosion, and all these cars were burned out, but some cars right alongside other cars, even though they were right next to each other, weren't burned out. Now that's pretty unusual, because if a high explosive bomb hit the ground in front of that hospital, first of all, there wouldn't be anything left of the hospital. There'd be a huge crater because of high explosives. Now, the difference between high explosives and low-grade explosives, if anybody cares to listen, I mean, I happen to know a lot about military things too, and not necessarily from my training, just from general reading and knowing things. Low-grade explosives are very slow-moving. Now, it's funny because the slow-moving effect can actually have more damage to the buildings and whatever. But a high explosive like TNT or RDX or other stuff, that goes at like 30,000 feet per second instead of, say, 10,000 or 12 or whatever the fuck it is. Now, if you dropped the bomb in the parking lot of that hospital, it would have shattered the windows in the hospital, which some of them aren't shattered. It would have blown down some of the walls. It would have put shrapnel and knocked over the cars that I said were still sitting there burned. So everything that I see, all of the evidence points to, this was not Israel, which I've always supported, by the way, because I felt that they're surrounded by enemies, and you know, I mean, sometimes they got to act harsher than I would prefer. because they don't want to get overrun and killed off. Genocide. So, anyway, back to, okay, so the explosion would have done a lot more damage. Now, Israel tried to point that out to any rational person, and they showed pictures of their, ordnance hitting the ground, and they showed still shots of this big a crater, 20 meters across or whatever. And these idiots that have been watching on the news, even though Israel came out and showed, and I'm sure the Americans and the Israelis have other intel, other evidence, and I watched CNN and they showed a person from the armed services or the, intelligence committee, and they can't say what they know, but they said based on the intelligence that they've seen, they're convinced it wasn't Israel. It was the Palestinians that killed their own people. So the thing is that who do you believe? That's like the bad guys always want doubt. So they would rather that we not know the truth. And where are the bodies? It might sound morbid, and I saw this on somebody else's video, and they were questioning, and I said, he has a good point. Because if they claim that 800 people were killed, show us the bodies. You don't have to line them up in that, but show us where the carnage was. Because they haven't showed that many yet. And if there's as many as they say, here's what a lot of people don't seem to realize. Gaza doesn't have a government. Hamas sort of acts like a government because after 2007, they had an election, they won the election, but then they had out with the Fatah group, and they had a civil war, killed them all off, drove them out, and then they were the ones left in charge. So they don't really have a government per se, and they don't care about their civilians. Terrorists don't care about people's lives. Go figure. So here's another point I thought was quite credible. They report this many people died, and they say like they're innocent civilians. Well, they might be, but if Israel is doing a good intel, a lot of the people they might be killing might be terrorists, militants, and therefore that was why they started this war. Now, it's guaranteed that because they use people for human shields that there are going to be civilians there too, because they want to have public opinion against Israel and the Americans. Now, I just saw a few moments ago a U.S. Navy ship intercepted 2 missiles that were rockets or missiles that were coming from Yemen towards Israel. The people doing this want a bigger conflict. They want to wipe out Israel. I'm not Israeli, I'm not a Jew, but I like to see no genocide, okay? I don't want to see anybody getting killed just because of their religion or their country or something like that. I would love to see the world living in peace, but unfortunately, that's not the case. So anyway, this story is, even the Canadian news has been, everybody's saying, oh, the Israeli airstrike killed this many people. Well, they should fact check. It might come out later that I'm wrong, but if I am, I'll own up to it. And I'll say, Jesus, everything looked credible at the time, but now I think the other way. But until someone comes along to make me convinced based on, oh, here's the other one I was mentioning. A story came out and said, okay, Israel came out and it looks pretty credible. But then they said, what about it could be an airburst rocket? So I'm so perturbed by this shit. I got onto my YouTube account, linked up my phone to the TV I was watching, and I punched in a response to that stupid fucking comment. I said, listen, an airburst wouldn't leave a crater. They had a crater at the site. It was just tiny. Okay? So your comment about it could be an Israeli airburst is they didn't want to be too committed to one side of the story, and they wanted to leave a bit of wiggle room. And the thing is that there's not two sides of the story. One of these stories is false. One of these stories is true. Which is it? Well, it's up to you and me and everybody else to look at it. But all them people over there, they're getting fed a false narrative. And because of that, they're acting on it. They've had riots in Beirut. They've had attacks on American bases in Iraq since then. And all of these things are getting inflaming the mob. So, it could be looked at that this information war is actually killing people. Because people are getting so, oh my God, Allah Akbar and all that, based on a false news story. And that could be exactly what the terrorists want. Now, enough of that, because really it's not my area of expertise, but I mean, that's my OCPD, okay? I get drove up the fucking wall when I see bullshit, right? Like, if you're going to tell me something, that make it a bit credible, okay? Make it a bit reasonable. Now, saying I'm trying to, I'll mention one or two other things. Someone asked me to do a little bit of an analysis, give them some stuff on the benefit of the doubt. So I hope I'm not treading on his toes, but I didn't know much about it before, but I looked up a little bit, because, see, Veterans Affairs Canada has always said that they want to give the benefit of the doubt to the veteran when they apply for benefits. Now, that's another thing, see? That's what I was saying before. If you get paid a sum of money because you got injured in the service Canada, because you got disabled, you're not getting a fucking benefit. You're getting a debt repayment, something that is owed to you by the government for protecting them. So, the thing is, you're not getting income. You're getting a capital payment to replace your capital loss. Your body got hurt. Now, the way the benefit of the doubt is, I said to the guy, like, to be honest, I said, I always found trouble with that phrase. Because the benefit of the doubt is usually associated with people who have been charged criminally. So, if the state wants to put you in the clink, they have to give you the benefit of the doubt, because the overwhelming power of the state is up against an individual person, and they're trying to take away their liberty, put them in jail. So when they always use that phrase, first of all, it rubs me the wrong way. They should try to come up with some other phrase than to say, we're going to give the veteran of the benefit of the doubt. Well, why are you doubting him? What is the problem? So I did a bit of searching through a research paper, a reference paper that Veterans Affairs Canada put out. I looked through the Hansard a little bit, and I Googled it a bit, and I saw what the U.S. says is a lot easier to understand than Veterans Affairs Canada, for one thing. Under their law, they have it written into the law itself about when you're adjudicating a case about a veteran in the States, that if the evidence points to it being sort of 50-50 whether or not they were injured in service, you get the benefit of the doubt to push the veteran up and get whatever benefit whatever they're asking for. But here's my gut feeling about the way Canada operates on veteran benefits. It seems like they use medical information. So instead of using the civil standard of proof, if you sued someone, you only have to convince the judge or the judge and jury that you're 51% right, and then you're 100% right legally. Well, if you introduce a different standard, say scientific proof, that's a lot higher level of proof. And Veterans Affairs seems to be always looking for more medical evidence. Now, here's the thing as far as I'm concerned. Any doctor who signs a form saying you were injured in service, they are a professional. They are not getting paid by you. They're getting paid by the government. Unless they know you personally or are willing to lie for you, the government ought to accept that evidence as gospel. Right? Unless you have evidence to the contrary. Why would you dismiss the veteran's doctor's opinion? But there's something else I've been working on recently, and that was those Auditor General reports and stuff. And they were talking about a problem with the government in certain cases where they were dealing. Now, I had to look that up. I kind of had an idea what it was. But basically, in the terms of if you're holding somebody else's money and you are a fiduciary, then you are self-dealing when you take your interest ahead of the person whose money you're looking after. And in the government's case, they were borrowing money from people without asking, and they were borrowing money at less than the market rates. They were paying 1 to 2% less than a person could get on the open market. They were giving themselves an advantage with our fucking money. Now, if you look at that and think about it in terms of a veteran applying for something, and if you put enough hurdles in that person's way, first of all, they might not apply at all. So they save money. That's self-dealing, in my opinion. Or if the person does apply and they get shafted with this scientific proof instead of the civil standard of proof, then again the government saves money. The government is self-dealing. So I'll clue up but on this note because I think I'm making sense, but the problem is people don't look at it that way. They look at a lot of these things as social welfare. You're not getting social welfare if you are getting a payment to balance the scales if you got hurt. So there was a U.S. report, a big long report. I don't know where I put it, but I've got some screenshots of it. And actually, it's not true. I found it recently and I was looking at it. Then I took some more screenshots. They were comparing workers' compensation to military compensation. And of course, they got a lot of it wrong, just like a lot of other people. But they were very technical in their, this one did a study on this one did a study on that. And for example, they said that they found that the more cumbersome, complicated, that the disability benefit application process was, the less people that applied. Well, did they really have to do a study on that? That's so obvious it's not funny. So then I cross-referenced that with the 2012 Fall Auditor General Report, where they said that the applications that veterans were expected to fulfill, were complex and above the grade level of the person having to fill in the forms. And that's exactly what that American report was saying. So they put in place a lot of red tape that you couldn't understand. Now, you're not supposed to do that to people who put their life on the line for the country. You are supposed to make a simple process and make it fair, and then that's good for everybody. You have people who won't complain because they have the fair outcome. If they apply for something and they get it because they get injured in service, they're not going to complain. They applied for something that they're owed anyway. Now, there might be disagreements about the level of compensation because some things in the government for these veterans things like the disability awards, which are now called pain and suffering compensation, or the old Pension Act, are based on a percentage. So here, they think, so I've read it, they think that you're going to try to inflate your claim because that's what everybody does. Well, in order to be a soldier, you have to be of good character. That's in the defense and administrative orders and directives, but that's the way they train people in Western militaries. You're not going to want someone who's a lying scumbag watching your back in a life and death situation. You want people that you can trust. That's of good character. Honest, not dishonest. So what makes the government think that you're going to be different once you're disabled? And if you're applying for something that you're going to lie to get more? See, they're doing people a disservice by doing that. Because if civilians are willing to lie to get more money, that's on them. But if you think that someone's lying, but they're not lying, and then you reduce the award because you're trying to balance out the fact that they're lying, then you just screwed someone over when you didn't have to. Listen, I actually almost missed this broadcast because I took a little nap and I woke up exactly at the time I was going to do it, so I came down and did it. I felt like skipping it. And I hope I didn't rant on too much about that Israel thing, because I wish I didn't have OCPD. And I wish there wasn't a war in Gaza, Israel. And I still find it hard to believe in my head that they call it a war when they're not country on country. Because you can't have a war on a principle or an idea, like when the Americans had a war on terrorism. You can't really have a war on terrorism. You can make a great slogan, a great bumper sticker, but normally, if you want to have a real war, you have to have states with state actors. Now, there's proxy wars, and there's information wars, and there's economic wars and stuff. But I'm talking about fighting war, people against people, because, it's always about armed conflict. Can't help but, last point, I promise, the beauty of American missiles over in Ukraine. They used the ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System or something, blew up about 15 Russian helicopters. See, that's like the terrorists in Israel. If they had stayed in their own little area, they wouldn't have caused a problem, but they came into Israel, killed a bunch of people, then went back home or got killed. Well, the Russians invaded Ukraine. I got no sympathy whatsoever to people who would be an aggressor state to go in and try to kill off the other people to get their land. I don't have any sympathy for them. So when I see them losing 10 or 15 helicopters because the Americans gave them missiles, and the missiles had 900 bomblets in them, and the bomblets blew up over the airport, and they took out a whole bunch of helicopters instead of having to shoot them one or two down with an Igla or a Stinger or something else. They got a whole bunch on the ground. Perfect. Maybe that will convince the Russians the error of their ways. Listen, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.